Brian, did you do it?
How are you feeling?
How you feeling, Brian? Brian, did you do it?
Are you ready to go to Idaho?
Brian, did you do it? You last time in Pennsylvania, Brian.
Joseph, I'm starting with you on this. I'm wondering, what do you think the police have? And I know this is speculation. There's been some reporting out there that there was DNA evidence in this case that led authorities to Brian Kohberger to identify him as a suspect. What do you think it was that possibly led to a DNA profile in this case?
Well, if what is being reported is accurate, my estimation, it's going to be a combination of things. First off, they would have found certainly a copious amount of blood at the scene. The question is, was it commingled with the perpetrator or alleged perpetrator's blood or any other kind of body fluids that might have been left around? You got to keep in mind, blood is not the only source for DNA-rich evidence. Another piece to this is going to be anything that was found on the bodies. And, you know, we go back to the hands being bagged, which is a common practice in my field to retain any kind of trace evidence. If there was anything contained beneath the fingernails, and we have to keep in mind, that's not simply skin. You can also find blood from a perpetrator beneath the fingernails as they're being raked away. And I think finally, whatever kind of tiebacks there might be in that vehicle, I think the vehicle is huge, because if he had allegedly been in that house and had committed these crimes, and I think admittedly he would have been super saturated in blood, that evidence would have transferred into the car somehow, and not just the blood, but any kind of other trace evidence he's taken away. So they've got this is an evidence-rich environment, and it will have been inoculated with everybody's DNA that was at the scene.
Brian Kohberger was taken into custody at his parents' home in Effort, Pennsylvania, in connection with the murders of 4 Idaho college students. The 28-year-old graduate student was pursuing a PhD in criminology at the Washington State University, about 10 miles away from the crime scene. Moscow Police Chief James Fry told ABC News that Kohberger is believed to be the only suspect in the high-profile case and that no other arrests are likely to be made.
The suspect's family released a statement following his arrest, expressing their sadness for the families of the victims, saying that they have cooperated fully with law enforcement to, quote, seek the truth and promote his presumption of innocence. Joining us now to discuss is senior national correspondent for News Nation, Brian Entin. Welcome, Brian. So
thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good to see you. This is obviously the break in the case we were all very hoping would come soon. Can you tell us, what led to this arrest and elaborate on? So you're in Pennsylvania right now. So obviously this is a totally different state across the country from where this took place. You fill us in on what you've been reporting on.
Yeah, I don't think anyone really saw this coming, that this would now end on literally the other side of the country from Idaho. I'm in Monroe County, Pennsylvania right now, where the hearing for Brian Kohberger will be happening this afternoon. It's expected to be quick because, he said his lawyer says that he's going to waive his extradition hearing and will not fight being brought back to Idaho. So he may be back in Idaho as early as tonight. In terms of what led police to release the probable cause affidavit, they tell us that they won't release that until he is back on the ground in Idaho. Apparently, there's an Idaho law that they can't release that affidavit until he's physically back in the state. But from what we can gather, it seems that they were tracking him for quite some time, at least several days. They must have had some kind of evidence. His attorney, his public defender, told me that he drove Brian Kohberger, the suspect, drove in mid-December in a white Honda Elantra from Washington State University, where he was a PhD student, which is very, very close to Moscow, Idaho, where the murders happened. That he drove from Washington to Pennsylvania mid-December with his father in a white Honda Elantra. And you'll remember that's the car that police have been looking for. So clearly the car was some part of the connection. DNA likely also involved, but we're still waiting to get all those.
So we're trying to obviously to learn more about him, and there's been a lot of reporting on what can be gleaned about him from social media and various places. I understand he's a militant vegan. He refused to even eat food off plates that had pots that had been used to cook meat. There's discussion of possible drug issues, a kind of loner personality being described, and then somewhat intriguingly, someone studying criminology and that kind of thing. What sort of profile is being constructed of this guy?
So yeah, it's interesting what you say about him being vegan. We've confirmed that even in the jail here in Monroe County that he's getting vegan food. You mentioned he was very strict about it. His aunt has said that when he came to visit, he wouldn't eat off of her pots and pans that have ever touched meat. She had to buy all new pots and pans. Clearly very intense in that way. He studied in criminal justice, and then he was getting his PhD in criminology right now at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. So certainly an interesting background. I should also point out, he claims that he's innocent through his public defender, that he plans to fight all of these charges. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
So you mentioned that there are not other suspects being investigated right now. It seems like there's a relatively high degree of confidence that this is the suspect that they're looking for at this time. Yet we don't know anything at all about what led the police to zero in, apart from this evidence about the make and model of the car. Was there any DNA evidence or anything of that sort?
So there are reports that there was DNA evidence, ancestral DNA that initially linked Kohberger to the crimes. Again, like full roadmap of what led to the arrest until we get probable is connected. And obviously, again, the car that he was in, you had the whole country looking for that white Hyundai Elantra. And he does have that car. So, they've searched the car now. They've done search warrants at a couple of different scenes, his parents' house here in Pennsylvania, also his office. He had an office because he was a PhD student. So they searched his office at Washington State University and also his apartment.
Well, I know, I'm sure the families of the victims are very, glad to see an arrest in this case. Obviously, the process needs to play out, and, we need to, obviously, the public needs to know whatever the police know that led them to conclude that this is likely the person. But I think it had been so long. People, I think, were not necessarily expecting an immediate break in the case. But did you get the sense that perhaps the police were onto him for some time, and it was just a matter of locating him, or they really, in the last, week or however long it's been, just, they got onto him and then they found him?
Yeah. Sorry, you were breaking up a little because of the service out here in Pennsylvania. It's kind of a rural area. It's not so good. We definitely get the sense that they were following him for quite some time. We don't know exactly how long at this point.
And perhaps it's more the attorney who's suggesting this, because the attorney, his public defender, said that he wants him to be psychologically tested to see, presumably it's to see whether he's competent to stand trial or not. That would be the first foray, the first way to try to protect your client, to see if you could get a psychiatrist to say that he's not fit to stand trial. And then if that doesn't work, then you would try to go for something like not guilty by reason of insanity.
Given that Brian Kohberger studied criminology and the mind of a criminal so extensively, in undergrad, that master's, working towards a PhD, are you puzzled by why this crime would be so messy, so bloody, and so prone to leaving DNA behind? Why would someone who knows so much about this commit a crime in this way?
Well, it's so interesting. First of all, the more you find out about him, it's just, he's really fascinating, and the trial hasn't even started. But I think that his fascination with psychology first, in undergrad, and then criminology, and as a master's and a PhD student and all of that, I think that a lot of that was to try to understand himself, as well as to try to commit the perfect crime. I think he's been struggling with some of these violent impulses that he has. You know, for example, we know that he has this obsessive compulsive attitude towards food, that he's not just vegan, but he doesn't want to have anything that has been in a pot or on a plate that has touched meat. And that tells me that he might be scared that he could actually engage in cannibalism after killing somebody. So, you know, I think that the reason why it was still so bloody with all his knowledge was because his rage. And again, you know that I think that, and I still think the more we find out that he's an incel, and that this was incel rage against women because of his history with women, starting in high school, well, at least starting in high school, where the girls would be bullying him and throwing things at him.
As we are watching items be removed from his apartment, given what we know about the crime and the nature of the crime, would the Idaho killer, the person behind this, be the type to keep trophies from the victims?
Mm-hmm. He might, yes. But you know what, the most fascinating thing that we learned recently is that we know now through cell phones that he was stalking them, that he was stalking the four of them, particularly Kaylee, you know, and she had told her father that she had a stalker. There was also a man who runs a store who was told either by Kaylee herself or by one of the other four students. And so we see that this is true. There's really just so much to unravel. But the thing that concerns me most in terms of, and I know, you know, he's allegedly this horrible person, but I think I don't think that they should have taken him off suicide watch. I've read some reports that they've taken him off suicide watch, and I think that that is still a possibility, that, you know, even with all this bravado, that really if he starts to think that things are looking bad for him, I think suicide is a very likely option.
Quadruple murder suspect Brian Kohberger expected to waive his extradition to Idaho in a hearing today. And now we're learning he was studying DNA and forensics in his criminology class just 2 weeks before the slayings.
With us live in studio, forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Biden. Of course, we always love having you on talking about this because you are such an expert in this field. But, you know, the main thing that I want to touch on right now is the DNA. We don't know for sure how it was tracked down. We'll find that out more in the coming days when he's back in Idaho. But his DNA apparently wasn't in the system. So explain to us how, if that is how investigators were led to Kohberger, how they would have found DNA somewhere else.
Yeah. DNA became a forensic investigative tool because all of the DNA matches, DNA of people of criminal records go to the FBI in a CODIS, C-O-D-I-S, database, just like they have a fingerprint database. So if there is somebody who has some DNA found at a crime scene or in a sexual assault kit that matches somebody who's already been arrested and has the DNA in CODIS, they can make a hit. But if there is no DNA sample in CODIS, because she's never been arrested, for example, you have the DNA of the suspect without a match. What's happened just in the past 5 years, that by using other non-CODIS databases like Ancestry databases, if there's a marker in the DNA that matches markers in other DNAs that are already voluntarily in databases, not with CODIS, not with the FBI, but with voluntarily, they can make a match of somebody who's similar and maybe a sibling or a cousin of the DNA at the crime scene or in the sexual assault kit.
And it's fascinating how they did that. Yeah, absolutely fascinating.
The first one was the Golden State killer in California, who 40 or 50 years later, 2017, they were able to make a match and find the guy who did it.
I want to get your thoughts on this latest information we're just getting in. Kohberger has allegedly been threatening guards from his Pennsylvania jail cell, with another inmate reportedly claiming he screamed out, "I cut them, I'll cut you. You come in here and I'll cut you." So many ways to break this down. Is this an admission that's going to be used against him in a court of law? Or I look at this and say, is he setting up an insanity defense. What's your
Yes,
breakdown?
it would seem to me that if they really have good DNA evidence, we don't know yet because it hasn't been released. That'll be released in the next couple of days when he comes back to Idaho. That if they have good evidence, we don't know that yet. We know it's been just rumored. Then an insanity defense might be the way the lawyers will proceed. It sounds to me that the defense lawyers are doing a good job. Remember, they've already stopped the Idaho police from tearing down the crime scene so that they could have their own experts come in and see if they agree or disagree with the determinations of the FBI and the police at the crime scene. So that an insanity defense is very possibility, especially because of his academic kind of records and invitations. So there are a whole lot of things that an insanity defense can exonerate somebody, not exonerate him, but take him off the criminal hook, or if the insanity defense will keep it from being a capital case. Right. That is, it would be a win for the prosecution if the win for the defense. If the prosecution goes with insanity with a capital case, not to get capital, but get life imprisonment would be a defense win in this case.
Really quickly, before we let you go, a few weeks before the murders, he was studying in detail, apparently, how forensics, DNA, and other evidence procedures help prosecutors. How far in do you think lawyers are looking into these claims?
They're going to go very far in. It sounds to me that the public defenders can be very excellent attorneys. And it sounds so far that what the public defenders have done with representing him has been a very professional, done very professionally, and there can be a lot of issues raised with DNA. From the very thing of the interference, the impairment of how the DNA was collected.